Hello everyone, how's it going? It is Draenor, as always, and I'm here to bring you a bit of a more special video. It's a demographic and military analysis of Azeroth and Outland, really. Namely, I'm going to look at sort of the population of most of the factions of World of Warcraft, their military strength, how they would maybe sort of compete against each other, or how they would affect or their overall strength in the world. And I'm doing this because there are no really hard numbers that Blizzard has provided us. The closest we got were the RPG books, which gave really detailed numbers for vanilla World of Warcraft, but the RPG books are now not canon. So we have pretty much nothing except speculation and little tidbits of information we garnered here and there. So as a result, this video will not have any hard numbers. I'm not going to say, the Blood Elves have exactly 20,000 people or something. No, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to employ a bit of a rating system from 1 to 10 to gauge their respective strengths, and I'm going to rate them on 4 categories. Population, obviously how many people there are. This would include also civilians, a sort of demographic analysis, I guess you could say. The quality of their military, that is to say, not their quantity or how strong their military is, but rather how would an individual soldier or an individual squadron, for instance, perform in said military on average, so to say. The next rating would be their overall military, which would mean their military as a whole, basically, and their influence and their power, I suppose you could say, on the world. For instance, the humans of Stormwind are not as strong quality-wise as, say, the wizards of Dalaran, but they have more of a military influence on the world than Dalaran, just to use an example. And finally, the 4th rating would be the unity of the faction, namely how the support of the people, I guess you could say, how united they are behind their leader or their goal, or with each other, and so on and so forth. Like I said, this will be mostly my educated guesses based on the fact that I pretty much know almost everything about Warcraft lore, and I'm going to employ the various abilities I've garnered as a history student. One other minor thing is that I will not talk about some specific factions, namely, I suppose you could call them immortal factions, such as the Burning Legion, the Elemental Lords, the Old Gods, or the Titan Forge. I'm not going to talk about them. And I'm also not going to tackle the Broken Isles or alternate-Draenor, because that is an entirely different can of worms. The information for those is already really new and kind of speculative and a bit contradictory. It's really a complicated mess. If I tackle those, it will be a lot more blind speculation than the rest of the list. So first and foremost, I'm going to display all of the factions I'm going to talk about on the screen, and I'm going to have a little map in the background of Azeroth and Outland, and as we talk on each faction, I'm going to sort of cover one of the parts of the worlds, namely, for instance, when I talk about the Blood Elves, I'm going to cover up Kofalas, logically. So, without further ado, I guess we should start. Going alphabetically through the list, we start with the Arakkoa, namely the Arakkoa of Outland. Now, Outland as a whole is a fairly depopulated continent, obviously due to all the wars and the devastation of the planet itself. So, on a population level, I'm giving the Arakkoa a 3 out of 10. The Arakkoa had a lot to suffer because the spires of Arak were destroyed. We only have Arakkoa outcasts remaining, and they were also obviously extremely affected by adventurers, by what happened in Burning Crusade. But nonetheless, I'm not giving them a lower score because I think they would remain a significant power, I guess you could say, in Outland. Even if they might not be particularly active, they would still exist, they would still be there, inhabit the zones they inhabit, and so on and so forth. Regarding the quality of their military, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Basically, Arakkoa are pretty deadly, they are great spellcasters, and they can pose a threat if need be. On the overall military, I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. They are definitely a regional power, but like I said, they were very affected by adventurers and by the destruction of Outland. And they could potentially pose a threat to Terrakar Forest, but other than that, not very much so. Regarding their unity, I'm giving them a 5 out of 10 because, first and foremost, there are multiple Arakkoa factions. There's the Skedis Arakkoa, the main group of Arakkoa. There's the Arakkoa Exiles living in Shattrath. There's the Sefek, which are more or less wiped out by now, I would presume. I'm mostly talking about the Skedis Arakkoa, but I'm going to presume that they are fairly divided as well, especially since we defeated in Burning Crusade Terok, and they don't really have anything to rally behind. So, as a sort of conclusion, the Arakkoa are really badly worn people, not a very major threat, but still present in Outland, and not exactly something to be ignored. Next up are the Blood Elves, namely the Kingdom of Quel'Thalas. Now, first and foremost, something to say about the Blood Elves is that their population numbers should be completely smashed by this point. First and foremost, and the biggest factor, is that they lost 90% of their population due to the Scourge invasion. Then a further 10% went away because they became High Elves. And then 15% were taken away by Prince Kael'thas, and some of them later returned, but nonetheless, the Blood Elf population of the Kingdom of Quel'Thalas should be extremely low, and it is actually mentioned a few times in the quest lines of Eversong Forest and the Ghostlands that they barely have the numbers to hold on to the territories that they have. So as a result, I'm giving the Blood Elf population a score of 2 out of 10, because, as I mentioned, they are almost nil, really. As for the quality of their troops, on the other hand, I'm giving them a very high score. I'm giving them a 9 out of 10, because basically the Blood Elf military is an extremely experienced and a very veteran force, I guess you could say. Before the Scourge invasion, I would say they would only be experienced in forest combat against the Forest Trolls, but after the Scourge invasion, first and foremost, they fought against the Scourge multiple times. Then there are the elite soldiers of Kael'thas in Outland, and really the Blood Elves have a lot of military experience behind them in these recent years. And that is kind of shown in game, as their troops are of a very high quality. You have the Blood Knights, which are the equal of any other Paladin order. You have the Magisters of Silvermoon, some of the most powerful mages of Azeroth. You have the Animal Golems, the Arcane Sentries. They have all of these things. Their quality is extremely high compared to their quantity. So, like I said, I'm giving them a quality score of 9 out of 10. In regards to their overall military strength, like I said, their numbers, or lack of numbers exactly, play a very important role in decreasing the score. But at the same time, there's this, they have very low numbers, but they have a very high quality. So, kind of reaching a middle ground, and considering what we do know of their standing in the world, I'm giving the Blood Elves overall military score 4 out of 10. They are a regional power, of course, and their assistance on the various battlefields of Icecrown, of Outland, and so on and so forth has been important, but not decisive, I would say. And like I said, their lack of numbers do play a very important role in this fairly low score, because in Burning Crusade at the very least they did not have the numbers to hold on to their own territories. We don't really know what's going on in after Burning Crusade. We don't know if, for instance, they have reclaimed the Ghostlands or not. Most likely not, because there are a few mentions of, for instance, Sylvanas fighting Undead Scourge in during the timeline of Mists of Pandaria. But they are still nothing to be... They are not to be neglected, and 4 out of 10 is not a very high score, but it is not the lowest score, and if they had actually joined the alliance in Mists of Pandaria like they were kind of supposed to, they would definitely have entirely swung the balance of the war in favor of the alliance. As to the unity of the faction, there is a bit to discuss here. I'm giving them a score of 7 out of 10. If Kael'thas was their leader, and if Kael'thas had not betrayed them, I would probably have given them a score of 9 or 10 or something like that. However, the Regency government in Quel'Thalas has been questioned a lot by its citizens. For instance, there is a scene which plays out in the bazaar of citizens questioning the government and being silenced. And there are some or at least were some internal tensions because of the Blood Oaths joining the Horde, because the Horde also caused damage to Quel'Thalas in the Second War. But really, after Kael'thas betrayed them, and after they Lor'themar and helped them sort of pay back that betrayal, and after they reclaimed the Sunwell, their unity, I think, would have gone up, so to say, because first and foremost there's the Sunwell, and secondly, Lor'themar has kind of proved his legitimacy, not just through the Kael'thas incident, but also through basically because he helped ensure the survival of the state of Quel'Thalas with these extremely diminished numbers, and well, so on and so forth. But there are rogue Blood Oaths throughout the world. There might still be hidden divisions within their society. We don't know if Lor'themar's plans to join the Alliance are common knowledge, or if this affected his standing among the Blood Oath people. So my educated guess is, like I said, a 7 out of 10. Next up on the list is the Cenarion Circle. Now, the Cenarion Circle is a bit of a weird one on this, because they are not a country, I guess you could say. They are not pretending to actually conquer territory, but nonetheless they do hold territory throughout Azeroth and Outland, and so they do bear mentioning. There's also the argument that one could say, oh, they're just kind of an extension of the Night Elf state, and it could be a valid argument, but let's treat the Cenarion Circle as kind of independent for the purposes of the video. As a result of this special status of the Circle, I'm not going to give them a population score, because there aren't really civilians, it's a community of druids. On the quality of their quote-unquote military, I would give them a 7 out of 10. The druids they have are powerful. Druids are competent spellcasters, and they are forced to be noted. On the overall quality of their military, I'm going to give them actually a 3 out of 10, because they might matter in the world, for instance in the Western Plaguelands or in Zangar Marsh, but they are not a very active power, or a power at all, really. They just kind of take care of nature, and by extension take territories and fight against those who would not take care of nature. On their unity aspect, I would give them 7 out of 10. Though there is a bit of a discussion here, namely, I'm not giving them a higher score because, first and foremost, a big factor in this unity would be the Nightmare corruption, which obviously would turn some druids against their fellow Circle druids. But the Nightmare is cleansed, so who knows how this might affect the rating. It's kind of too early to tell. The other factor in their disunity is that there is a conflict in the Cenarion Circle between Tauren druids and Night Elf druids. The conflict has kind of died down recently, but it was a fairly significant plot point in Cataclysm and before Cataclysm. Namely, the whole character of Fandral Staghelm was... Well, not the whole character. Part of his character was that he opposed the entry of the Tauren in the Cenarion Circle. And there were a few in the Shattering novel. There was an incident where Tauren druids were blamed for the massacre of Night Elf druids. But regardless, the Cenarion Circle is kind of debatable to have on this list, but they are nonetheless, like I said, a force in the world, and they do bear mentioning. They are fairly significant, although not to the level of an actual country, and like I mentioned, they are very selective of when they exercise their influence. Next up on the list would be the Centaur, the main power, I guess you could say, in Desolace, and in parts of the Barrens, and so on and so forth. Now, as regards to the population, I'm giving them a fairly low score. I'm giving them a 2 out of 10 because they are a nomadic society, or at least they're supposed to be a nomadic society, and they have been in constant war both with each other and with the other races of the world. So their population has obviously taken a bit of a hit. As to the quality of their troops, I guess you could say, I'm giving them a fairly high score, a 7 out of 10. They are pretty good warriors, they are competent spellcasters, and they were a big enough threat before Thrall showed up in Kalimdor to the Tauren. They threatened to wipe the Tauren out, and an individual Centaur is nothing to be scoffed at. But in regards to their overall military strength in the world, I'm giving them a 2 out of 10. Because first and foremost, they are not a united force. And secondly, they are mostly a regional power, or a power in their specific places. They're more of an annoyance. You're not going to see the Horde, for instance, seriously threatened by the Centaur anymore. As to the unity aspect, probably the most important aspect, their unity is, I'm giving it 1 out of 10. It is abysmal. There are numerous tribes which are in conflict with each other and with themselves. They are a fractured people which kill each other, kill everyone around them, and they are not united at all. Hence why their overall military score is so low, because they tend to fight each other a lot. Next up would be the Cult of the Damned, which I'm counting as separate from the Scourge, because, well, it's a debatable matter, but I think they are kind of separate powers. First and foremost, their population, I'm going to give it as 1 out of 10 because, frankly, they have been beaten down by every major power in the Eastern Kingdoms almost. They only hold Scholomance, and even Scholomance has been ravaged numerous times. The Cult of the Damned, at least in the Eastern Kingdoms, is down to several cultists and a handful of undead. They were really threatened, and if you do the Warlock quest chain in Legion, they were scared of the Azeroth Shadow Council, which was only like 30 people remaining. So the Cult of the Damned are insignificant population-wise, and military and overall military strength-wise, I guess I'm going to spoil it away. Their overall military, I'm also giving it as 1 out of 10, because really there's only a handful of them, and unless they are completely ignored and allowed to raise up all the graves in Lordaeron again, they won't really be a threat anytime soon, unless, say, Bolvar steps in or something. As for overall quality, I'm giving them a 4 out of 10 because undead don't really make good soldiers. Undead are shambling corpses. Undead are, they're shambling corpses. Their spellcasters would be good, but balancing out the spellcasters with undead gives them a fairly low score. The Scourge's tactics lie in superior numbers and swarming the enemy with superior numbers. The Cult of the Damned doesn't really have superior numbers, but so yeah. As to their unity, however, I'm giving it them a 10 out of 10 because the few cultists that are pretty much know that they don't really have anywhere else to go on Azeroth. They only have each other in order to survive, I presume. So I presume once again that they would be fairly united, at least in order to not die in the true sense of the word. But regardless, they are, like I said, not a very important part of the Eastern Kingdoms. They hold Scholomance and parts of the Eastern Plaguelands, I would presume, and that's kind of about it. They're not very significant at all. Next up would be the city-state of Dalaran. Now, Dalaran has been pretty important in Warcraft history, to say the least. But nonetheless, they are not a superpower, for instance. Regarding their population, they are a city-state. And the city-state is comprised of, well, a city. So their population is naturally not going to be very great. So I'm personally giving it a 3 out of 10. There is also not to mention the fact that Dalaran was destroyed during the Third War and, as far as we know, according to Warcraft 2, attacked during the Second War, so its population has suffered hits, and but nonetheless, they do remain a significant force in the world, and Dalaran is by no means an abandoned city, for instance. So that's why I'm justifying this particular score. Regarding their overall quality, Dalaran has a very high quality. I'm giving it full marks, 10 out of 10. Dalaran is the premier school of magic in Azeroth. Their mages are the strongest, more or less in all of the world, with the possible exception of Silvermoon or perhaps some other quote-unquote evil factions. So yeah, overall quality level, Dalaran is 10 out of 10. Regarding their overall military, I'm giving them a 6 out of 10. Dalaran is very strong, but it's not necessarily the decider of the world, so to say. It's not, again, a superpower. They are though very strong, and they are influent in the world. And them joining one side or the other might swing the tide of a war in one direction or another. So they are significant, but they are not a superpower. Regarding their overall unity, it's a bit of a interesting topic, but I'm personally giving them a 9 out of 10. Dalaran is a fairly ordered city. Nobody's really contesting the authority of the Council of Six, but it has had its history of rogue mages, and the underbelly of Dalaran is, again, not a very good place, I guess you could say. So, overall, Dalaran is united behind the Council of Six, is united in this particular case in the fight against the Legion, but there might be a few seeds of internal divisions. Maybe not so much now after the Third War and all of that, but who knows. Next up would be the Darkspear Trolls. Now the Darkspear should, in theory, be almost insignificant to the world. They were originally one of the smaller tribes in Stranglethorn, so already their numbers weren't really great. And then they were exiled across the Great Sea to some islands in the middle of the ocean. And then they were attacked and really hit very hard by the Naga sea witch Zarjira. And then they had to make another exodus to Kalimdor, not to mention all of the wars they have participated in as part of the Horde. There's also Garrosh's the uprising against Garrosh Hellscream, and so on and so forth. Really, the Darkspear should barely exist. Yet nonetheless they do. Normally, if this was a rational, normal universe, I would give them a kind of a score of 1 out of 10, but because they do exist in Warcraft, they do continue to make appearances throughout Azeroth as part of the military campaigns of the Horde and so on. I'm giving them a score of 2 out of 10 because, like I said, they exist and they kind of matter, I suppose. Regarding their overall quality, I'm giving them a fairly high score, 7 out of 10. A Darkspear warrior is not something to be scoffed at. Especially if you're facing one of their casters or, pray tell, a Shadow Hunter. As to the overall importance of their military, their overall military strength, like I said, they are one of the smaller troll tribes. They are not very significant, but they nonetheless continue to appear, so I'm forced to kind of give them a bit of a higher score than I would rationally, so I'm giving them a score of 3 out of 10. Because, well, they do matter in that little southern corner of Durotar, and they have helped the Horde throughout its campaigns. Even if perhaps their contribution was not entirely essential, they still were there and they still mattered somewhat. As to their unity, if Vol'jin were alive, I would give them 9 out of 10. The Darkspear are very loyal to their chieftain, with exceptions here and there, obviously. But after Vol'jin, I genuinely do not know. There aren't really many important Darkspears that can take Vol'jin's place. There's Master Gandrin, I suppose. But other than that, or Rokon, I guess. But other than that, like I said, there aren't really many Darkspears that can take Vol'jin's place. The Darkspears do remain committed to the Horde. They have been possibly possibly the most loyal subject to the Horde, debatably. Well, that's a whole other debate. So their unity would probably still be pretty high after Vol'jin's death. But then again, many owe their loyalty to Vol'jin personally, not necessarily to the Horde. So who knows? Next up would be the Draenei. Now, obviously the Draenei have suffered a lot due to their war with the Orcs. In fact, the vast majority of their population, over 90%, was wiped out by the Orcs. There's also the fact that longer-lived races tend to not have as many children as shorter-lived races, and this is the case with the Draenei. So the Draenei population is very, very low. I'm giving them 1 out of 10. They barely exist, but nonetheless they are to be forced to be noted, I guess you could say. Regarding their quality, I'm giving them 8 out of 10. A Draenei warrior is something of powerful warrior, not to mention that Draenei are veterans of first and foremost their war against the Orcs, and then their conflicts with the Burning Legion and across the cosmos as they have fled. So a Draenei warrior is on average a very experienced one, and not to mention a powerful one, first and foremost because of the physical characteristics of the race, and secondly because of his training and so on and so forth. And their casters are also of a very high quality. The Orcs won the war against the Draenei mostly because of their numbers and because of their demonic magic. Otherwise, the Draenei had the superiority in regards to quality. As to their overall military strength, they have, like I said, they have a very low population. They are not a deciding great power. Their overall military strength is, in my opinion, 2 out of 10. They are very good advisors. They are very good advisors for the Alliance, and they are very good elite troops, but they are not really a power in their own right. They wouldn't really be able to hold on a battlefield against the Horde, for instance. And this was kind of seen in the attack on the Exodar in Legion, how, well, there's barely any Draenei around. In regards to their unity, however, they have a very high score. I'm giving them a 9.5 out of 10. They are all united behind Velen, they are all believers in the light, all united in the fight against the Legion, but there is the occasional bad apple, and sometimes the bad apple can be in a very important place, such as former Exarch Sokerfar, who became an Eredar, a demonic Eredar. So the Draenei are very united behind their goal and behind their profit, but like I said, there is the potential for bad apples. So, as a sort of conclusion, the Draenei are, like I said, excellent advisors. They would make excellent generals and an excellent elite force, but not someone. You can't form an army exclusively out of Draenei by any means. Next up would be the Dwarves, namely the Kingdom of Ironforge. The Dwarves are, in my opinion, possibly the greatest power on Azeroth, the strongest state, possibly the strongest race, maybe with some possible exceptions. First and foremost, regarding their population, the Dwarves have had stability for for hundreds of years since the War of the Free Hammers. The only interruption was during the Horde invasion during the Second War. But even during the Horde invasion, they didn't really lose that many people, since the vast majority of their population took refuge in Ironforge. They didn't lose many people in combat against the Horde. So regarding population, they have had hundreds of years of peace, more or less. They have had time to develop, and the conditions to develop. So I'm giving them a score of 9 out of 10. They should be logically, like I said, possibly the most populous race on Azeroth. As to the overall quality of their military, it's also pretty high. I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Dwarves tend to be very stocky, very resistant, very full of stamina, I guess you could say. And their technology, and they have a very high level of technology. Not as high as the Gnomes or the Goblins, for instance, but still one of the highest in the world. So it's, like I said, nothing to scoff at. Despite this, however, their overall military strength, I'm only giving it as 7 out of 10. Keep in mind that military strength, I'm counting it as kind of together with their influence on the world. Because the Dwarves tend to stay at home a lot and kind of fight for their own lands, not really participate that much in the campaigns of the Alliance. Of course, there are dwarf regiments and there are dwarves in the campaigns of the Alliance, but unlike, say, Stormwind, which tends to send all of its armies in campaign, the dwarves tend to stay at home a lot. Like I said, they mostly send explorers out rather than overall troops. So their overall military strength is pretty high, but their influence on the world is not high as a result of their sort of non-involvement. One other weak point of the Dwarves is regarding the unity aspect, namely, of course, the Dwarves are divided into 3 clans, the Bronzebeards, the Wildhammers and the Dark Irons, and, well, the joining of these clans has brought a lot of military strength to Ironforge and population, hence, again, why the population score is so high, but they are in conflict with each other, and they only live in a very tenuous peace under the Council of Three Hammers. However, so far the Council of Three Hammers has proven to be pretty effective in maintaining order in Ironforge and maintaining unity. There are still conflicts, there is still tension simmering, but the Council has a handle on things, so to say. It remains to be seen what will happen when Dalaran II, Moira's son, becomes old enough to rule, and if the Wildhammers would join in, that's a whole other discussion. But so far the council seems to be doing a job. There are tensions underfoot. There have been cases of betrayal, especially with the Dark Irons, so I'm giving them a overall unity score of 6 out of 10. Next up would be the Fel Orcs of Outland, namely after Illidan's defeat, after the Fel Horde was crushed, and so on and so forth, because I imagine they still matter somewhat. They have not all been wiped out by any means. Now, first and foremost, regarding their population, The Orcs of Draenor have had a lot to go through. Firstly, a lot of them have died because of the famine and the starvation going on Draenor. Then they have been utterly decimated during Beyond the Dark Portal by the Alliance. And of course they were then affected by the destruction of Draenor. They were brought together by Magtheridon and then Illidan, who both then proceeded to make new Fel Orcs by corrupting existing Orcs, so their numbers were boosted a bit then. But then they were smashed again by the Alliance and Horde and so on, and the Shattar. And as a result, I'm giving the Fel Orcs a population score of 2 out of 10 after Illidan's defeat and so on and so forth. Because Orcs tend to breed very fast. That's how it's been described, that they've managed to recover the numbers so many times, because they breed a lot. So their population, I'm not giving them a 1 because they might have started to slowly recover now that the war has shifted away from Outland. But nonetheless, they have been crushed so often that their population has to be extremely low and probably not enough to be a significant threat. So, like I said, I'm giving them a 2 out of 10. Regarding their overall quality, however, I'm giving them a very high score of 8 out of 10. A Fel Orc is basically an Orc on steroids. He's a lot stronger, he's a lot meaner, he's a bit stupider as well, admittedly, but he is a lot stronger again, and he will probably crush your face in. Their spellcasters are not exceptional, but they do tend to have decent warlocks and dark shamans, and nothing to scoff at, certainly. As to their overall strength of the remaining Fel Orc military, I'm giving them a 2 out of 10. Like I said, their numbers are very few, and I don't think they really pose much of a threat to Outland anymore. I guess, for instance, if the Burning Legion came in force to Outland again, they could take over the remaining Orcs and Fel Orcs, and they could matter then, but at the moment, I don't think the Fel Orcs matter that much. Again, we don't have a lot of information on Outland after Illidan's defeat, but this is just my educated guess that they do not really matter now. As to their unity, I'm also giving them a very low score, a 1 out of 10. Because Orcs tend to be very factionary, and now that Illidan is gone from Outland, and Kargath Bladefist is dead, and they have nothing to unite behind. So they most likely, almost certainly, have split back into their own little clans, and which were always in conflict regardless. And now these little clans are probably also eating each other up and killing each other, because Fel Orcs are angrier Orcs, and Orcs already had the tendency to fight each other, and Fel Orcs are even more so. So, regarding their unity aspect, if a strong warlord could potentially appear and unite all of the Fel Orcs into a significant force, but that hasn't happened yet, and he would have to be a very strong warlord to do so. Next up would be the Forsaken. Now, the population of the Forsaken is a bit of a weird subject. Namely, there are obviously not as many as the original population of Lordaeron, which I would have given a full-on 10 out of 10. But the population of the Forsaken initially consisted of the freed undead of Sylvanas, which were not able to replenish themselves. They could not grow as a population. They could only decrease through war, or eventually their loss of sanity, and so on and so forth. But they nonetheless had enough numbers to hold on to the western part of Lordaeron, and then commit troops to help the Blood Elves, and then to fight the Lich King in Northrend. So their numbers, even then, were not exactly something to scoff at. And then Sylvanas added the Valkyr, and the numbers have started to grow almost explosively. In fact, their numbers and their kind of swarm tactics are becoming a significant part of their society, I guess you could say. There's more and more Forsaken. There's obviously the concern that well, they are unable to breed and they are unable to continue naturally. But similar to the Scourge, their numbers continue to be replenished time and time again due to war. So I'm giving the Forsaken a very tentative 7 out of 10. They have enough numbers and enough military capabilities to conquer the vast majority of Lordaeron as they have, and they are a significant power in Lordaeron, and they presumably have the population to prove it. Again, we don't really have hard numbers, and it's kind of hard to speculate how many of them, or how many, or if the Valkyr truly provided such a gigantic boost to the Forsaken. There's a lot of discussion going on here, but I'm kind of sticking to my 7 out of 10 for now, at the very least. As to the overall quality of their troops, I'm giving them a 6 out of 10, which is kind of less than I would give most of the other playable races. The Forsaken, well, their biggest weakness is that they are undead, and undead are not as strong physically or as agile as living beings, no matter what you do to them. On the other, and like I said, a part of their tactics rely on this swarming tactic again. On the other hand, they do have a good level of technology, and they are expert assassins, and they are expert special forces, and so on and so forth. So that kind of drags them up a bit. But I'm sticking to my 6 out of 10. As to their overall military strength and influence on the world, it is very high. I'm giving them 8 out of 10 because, like I said, they hold most of Lordaeron. They are a very important part of the Horde, possibly the strongest part of the Horde at the moment, and they are one of the greatest powers on Azeroth, really, militarily speaking, and geographically speaking, I guess you could say. And they have participated in all of the campaigns of the Horde, even if only they sent a few apothecaries here and there. But yeah, they are very notable. As to their overall unity, Forsaken claim to have free will, but in practice they are all loyal to Sylvanas to a greater or lesser degree. Well, most of them are loyal, but those who are not loyal were for the most part purged during Varimathras' rebellion, and after ending Cataclysm and afterwards, Forsaken theoretically have free will, and they can return to being dead or go on their merry way, and so on and so forth. But the overall Forsaken under Sylvanas are very united behind her and very supportive of her, and so on and so forth. So I'm giving them this high unity score of 9 out of 10 because Sylvanas, again. Sylvanas is really a one-word answer to why the Forsaken have such a high unity score, no joke. Next up would be the Gnomes. Now, population-wise, the Gnomes should be pretty few in number, especially considering everything that happened to their capital. However, until everything that happened with their capital, with Gnomergon, they had peace and stability for hundreds, if not thousands of years, so they had time to develop on their own. But this particular incident, the Gnomergon incident, pretty much affected 90% of gnomekind, I'm willing to say. So I'm giving them an overall population score of 3 out of 10. They still exist, they still matter, but they are not... They have been very affected by Gnomergon, and they... Like I said, they are not as populous as the dwarves or the humans, and so on and so forth. As to the overall quality of their troops, however, I'm giving them a very high score. I'm giving them a 9 out of 10. Gnomes probably have some of the best technology on Azeroth, possibly the best technology. Don't tell the goblins I said that. And this technology level, this contribution to the Alliance really, is what props up their quality level so high, because Gnomes are very high quality troops. maybe an individual gnome would be fairly weak, as physically speaking, but he makes up with it by the technology and equipment he receives as part of the military, so to say. As to their overall military strength and influence, I'm giving them a 5 out of 10. Frankly, there's not enough gnomes to really turn the tide of a war or something like that, but their technology has really boosted the Alliance. Their technology is really one of the driving force of Alliance technology, and their technology is what props them up so high, basically. Even if their overall military might be a bit on the weak side, they make up with it with technology. As to their unity, this is a bit of speculation on my part. I'm giving them 7 out of 10. Now, most gnomes are committed to retaking Nomargon, and they are loyal to Gelb and Mechatwerk, but Gnomish society is a very free society, very open to free speech, free all of that. So I don't really think that many gnomes are interested in the overall government, so to say. Even in Gelbin's short story, if I remember correctly, he was thinking, is retaking Nomargon just my selfish ambition? Do gnomes even care about that, really? So this freedom of their society kind of disrupts their unity. Also, you can see gnomes pretty much everywhere in most of the factions of Azeroth, be it Dalaran or Warlock circles or so on and so forth, because of how free their society is and how non-committed really they are to the central government. Next up would be the Goblins. Now, the Goblins are a bit of a more interesting case because in theory they are all united under a central government named the Trade Coalition, but in practice the various cartels are pretty much independent. So, for the purposes of this video, I'm going to talk about 2 very specific cartels, the Bilgewater, the Horde Goblins, and the Steamwheedle cartel, namely because they seem to be the cartels which actually hold territory instead of just financial interests, I guess you could say. So, starting with the Bilgewater, the Bilgewater population should be extremely small, even smaller than the Blood Elves or the Darkspears or so on and so forth. Namely because, first and foremost, the destruction of Kazan, all of the survivors of the Bilgewater cartel were just the people Galluix managed to cram on his boat. But actually the goblins appear quite a lot in World of Warcraft, and they have constructed a bustling, fairly populous city in Ajara. So, even though they should be very few in number, the Bilgewater cartel still is a significant enough force. So, on a population score, because of these contradicting factors, I'm giving them a score of 3 out of 10. They're not very populous, but they still matter. As to the quality of their military, I'm giving the Bilgewater and the Steamwheedle the common score of 8 out of 10. Namely because goblins tend to blow a lot of things up. They have a gigantic technological advantage, pretty similar to the gnomes actually. The only reason I'm giving the goblins a lower score than the gnomes is because the inventions of the goblins tend to blow themselves up more often than their intended target. But they are still a very high quality troops, I guess you could say, and moving on to their overall military score, which was where I wanted to go with that particular idea, I'm giving both the Bilgewater and the Steamwheedle 6 out of 10 because their technology and their influence in various factions has helped significantly boost said faction. For instance, just look at the Horde after the Bilgewater joined in. There's a almost gigantic technological explosion. Mind you, the Horde did employ goblin engineers beforehand, but this also kind of plays into why they are such a high power level, relatively speaking. And the Steamwheedle cartel has, in regards to their overall military level, the Steamwheedle do have various enclaves throughout the world, and they are an influent faction, hence why they also received this fairly high score. Moving backwards a bit, let's talk a bit about the population of the Steamwheedle. Again, it should be fairly low because Kazan was blown up, but on the other hand, the Steamwheedle didn't really seem to have that many assets on Kazan itself. A lot of their main outposts and indeed their capital was in the rest of Azeroth. Their capital is Gadgetzan. So I'm giving the Steamwheedle a higher population score of 5 out of 10. It should be still fairly low because of Kazan going the way of the, but it is still significant, especially since a lot of their assets, a lot of their cities are outside of Kazan and have managed to survive. As to the unity aspect, I'm giving the Bilgewater Goblins a 3 out of 10 because Goblins tend to be very competitional with each other, obviously. They are more or less ruthless capitalists. And especially the Goblins' trade prince is pretty much universally despised. There are very few people you would unite behind Trade Prince Gallywix other than because of financial interests. So the Goblins are fairly disunited faction, at least for the Bilgewater cartel. The Steamwheedle receive a slightly higher score of 5 out of 10 because, well, once again, Goblins tend to be very competitive with each other and they tend to backstab each other a lot and so on and so forth. But the Steamwheedle Goblins seem to be pretty well united behind their common goals, namely resisting or fighting back against the Bloodsail Buccaneers and maintaining their sort of trade empire. So they are, in my opinion, a more unified force than the Bilgewater cartel. Next up would be the Mantid. Now the Mantid are one of the most interesting cases on the list because their scores vary very highly depending on the time period in history, I guess you could say. Namely, first and foremost, let's talk about population. The Mantid population can grow to an immense size, namely during the time where they swarm, where they could basically very easily overrun all of Pandaria. But during the times where they do not swarm, or when the swarm has been incapacitated, their population is abysmally low, to the point where the powers on the other side of the wall, namely, for instance, the Mogu, could potentially conquer them. So on a population score, they would be between 2 out of 10 and a 9 out of 10, depending again on the time period in history. Now, if we are talking about this specific in the present time period, I'm not entirely sure how many of them were lost during this premature swarm that they experienced, and how many of them remain, really. I imagine quite a lot of them were lost, especially since we killed their Grand Empress and so on. So I'm leaning towards the lower side of that scale, but I don't really think that they would be at the abysmal level of 2 out of 10, so to say. As to their overall quality, it is pretty low. I'm giving them 3 out of 10. Their tactics are entirely swarm tactics. In fact, that's the kind of the whole thing, isn't it? They swarm the wall. They rely on their big numbers. And again, they don't swarm with the intent of conquering the wall, but rather with thinning out the wheat from the chaff, so to say. So the quality of their troops is pretty low. Their elites are extremely skilled, namely the Paragons and the elite guards of the Empress, for instance, but they are few and far between, so hence how I'm justifying the score. As to their overall military strength, it again depends on the time period in history and their population levels, like I mentioned with when I talked about, again, their population levels. So I'm kind of the score I'm giving them for their overall military is between a 3 out of 10 and an 8 out of 10. When they swarm, they can be colossal. They could, like I said, they can overwhelm the entirety of Pandaria if they wanted to. But in the periods where they are inactive or where they don't swarm, they are strong enough to hold their side of the wall, but not really strong or active enough to do much beyond that. That doesn't mean that for travelers should just wander around in the Dread Wastes during the periods where Mantid society is at its lowest levels, because they would still be killed. Again, for the purposes of this video, of talking about how they would be after the events of Mists of Pandaria, with the Empress dead, their swarm defeated, and so on and so forth. Again, I'm leaning towards the lower side of the scale, maybe 4 or so out of 10. I'm not really giving them a 3 out of 10, because that still seems a bit too low. They still matter. On the other hand, in regards to their unity, full marks, 10 out of 10. Normally they would be extremely united behind their Empress, and behind the Klaxi, obviously. After what happened in Mists of Pandaria with the Empress dead, it is stated that the Empress had an heir, and the heir is currently groomed to rule. But the Mantid are nonetheless loyal to her, and they are mostly loyal to the old gods. Hence how you can see how the Klaxi Paragons helped Garrosh Hellscream in the Siege of Orgrimmar. So they are an extremely united faction. You won't see dissensions. You might see arguments among the Klaxi regarding how they should proceed, for instance, or occasional bickering between the Empress and the Klaxi, but they all work together towards the common goal of helping the old gods when they would inevitably return. Next up would be the Mogu. Namely, I'm going to talk about them after the defeat of the Thunder King. The Mogu have been completely smashed because the Thunder King was defeated. They have apparently gone into hiding again. So their population, I'm giving it as 1 out of 10. They are very few in number now, and even before they started reappearing to support the Thunder King, I don't think their numbers would have been very high even then, because how would you keep a very large population hidden, really? So, hence how I'm justifying this very low score. As to their overall quality, on the other hand, I'm giving them a very high score of 8 out of 10. A Mogu warrior is a very deadly one, and though they may not fight very often themselves, the constructs they employ and the magic they use does bump up their score very high. Despite this, even if a individual Mogu warrior is strong, their overall military right now, if it can even be called that, is nigh on insignificant. I'm giving them a 1 out of 10. Namely because, like I said, they have been completely smashed. They have gone back into hiding. They don't matter almost at all. Potentially you could see a few raiding parties pop up here and there. And again, they do have the potential to reappear hundreds or thousands of years from now, like they have with this recent crisis of the Thunder King. But at the moment, they are completely smashed, and they should pretty much lay low. They don't really matter that much in the politics of Pandaria. So yeah. Regarding their unity, it is again abysmal. I'm giving them a 1 out of 10. Mogu are extremely prone to infighting, and you could see that at various instances throughout Mists of Pandaria and throughout their history. And now that the Thunder King is dead and the Zandalari have gone, there's nothing to unite them. The Mogu would have gone back to their clans or to their individual families and gone back to fighting each other, or even fighting among the clan or the family. So the Mogu are pretty much insignificant at this point in history. They do have the potential to reappear hundreds, if not thousands of years from now, but at the moment you shouldn't see more than, say, a few hundred of them left, for instance. Next up would be the Naga, which are a fairly speculative topic for this particular video. Namely, at the very least regarding their population, we don't really know how many Naga there are. There could be just a few thousand, there could be a few million, really. More likely their population is fairly large, since they have been able to develop for 10,000 years so far, really. And they have posed a significant threat when they have tried to pose a significant threat. But on the other hand, they haven't really used their muscle so much, which raises some question. Maybe the Naga population really is fairly low if they haven't tried to invade the surface world seriously from now. So on that basis, I'm giving the Naga a population score of between 7 and 10 out of 10. They are most likely a populous race, but it is debatable how populous they are. I'm hesitant to give them, like I said, full marks, so I'm leaning a bit towards the lower side of this particular scale, but it is what it is. Feel free to interpret it as you want. Regarding the quality of their troops, it kind of varies. I'm giving them full marks 10 out of 10 if they fight in water. If they fight on land, however, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Naga are aquatic creatures, so they obviously have a big advantage in water, and they are deadly warriors and very experienced and skilled spellcasters, so in water, underwater, they are pretty much unmatched. On land, however, it's not their environment. They move in a very sluggish fashion because they're serpents, basically. And they are still strong spellcasters and strong warriors, but they are again at a disadvantage on land. So 10 out of 10 on water and a 7 out of 10 on land. Regarding their overall military strength, the Naga have the ability to pretty much take control of all of the seas on Azeroth and, say, destroy all international shipping, probably destroy all of the fleets on Azeroth. But again, they don't really use that power very much, which again makes me question, do they really have said power? So for that reason, I'm giving them, again, a score of between 8 and 10 out of 10, because I'm not entirely sure just how powerful they are. They almost certainly, like I said, can take over the oceans, but can they then extrapolate that and take over the land? It's kind of hard to tell, honestly. Regarding their unity, it's a bit of a weird topic. The Naga are all, or 99% of them, united behind Queen Azshara, so technically their unity should be fairly high. But on the other hand, the Naga are split into many factions, many tribes, which don't really cooperate that often, unless again under direct orders from Azshara, and they sometimes even compete with each other, or maybe even fight each other. So they are, like I said, extremely united behind Azshara, but not really with each other. So on that basis, I'm giving them a 6 out of 10. Next up would be the Night Elves. Now, the Night Elves have had a lot to suffer due to the Third War and the various wars of the Horde, which have seriously thinned their population, not to mention the events of Cataclysm and how Darkshore was blown up, the events of the Emerald Nightmare, and so on and so forth. But on the other hand, they still managed to be possibly the strongest individual power in all of Kalimdor. That is to say, if the Horde was split into its base components, the Night Elves would be able to beat, say, only the Orcs of Orgrimmar or only the Tauren and so on. So they are the strongest power of Kalimdor currently. But again, like I said, they have had a lot to suffer throughout the various wars, so I'm giving them a population score of 6 out of 10. As to their overall quality of their troops, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10, which is fairly high. Night Elf Sentinels and Druids and the various other units in their army are very skilled. They are, most of them, veterans of multiple wars, or at least small-scale battles between in their own territory, and that score would theoretically be even higher in forests because it is their natural environment and elves are naturally suited towards a guerrilla style of warfare. But on the other hand, we see in the novel Wolfheart that Garrosh Hellscream and his orcs managed to beat the Night Elves at guerrilla warfare. They almost take over Ashenvale at first entirely through guerrilla warfare, which first and foremost it's Ashenvale, it's the homeland of the Night Elves, and secondly it's a forest, it's the territory where Night Elves thrive, yet these bulky or unhandly orcs manage to beat them at their own game. So it's debatable just how skilled the Night Elves would be, how more skilled compared to how they normally are the Night Elves would be in the forests. So I'm sticking to this with this particular 7 out of 10. Regarding their overall military score, I'm giving them a fairly high score again of 7 out of 10. Because, like I said, they are the strongest individual power on Kalimdor. They dominate the entire northern third of the continent. And they are a very significant force within the Alliance and within the various wars the Alliance, and not just the Alliance, has had throughout the events of World of Warcraft and so on. So they are a significant force, they are a major power within the Alliance, and they are the dominant forces of Kalimdor, like I said. Regarding their unity, I'm again giving them a very high score of 8 out of 10. They are pretty much united behind their central government, behind Tyrande Whisperwind and Malfurion Stormrage, and behind their belief in Elune and their traditions. But there are a few things which drag them down a bit, namely, first and foremost, the inclusion of the Highborn, which has created tensions within Night Elf society, and secondly, because there are cases of Night Elf traitors. First and foremost, you could just look at the various things that have happened with the Druids, namely the Druids of the Flame, the Emerald Nightmare, and so on. But there are also individual Night Elf mercenaries and bandits roaming around. Nonetheless, their unity still remains pretty high, as most Night Elves are united behind Tyrande and Malfurion and Elune and so on. And they do stick behind their, so to say, central government. Next up would be the Ogres of Outland. Again, this is after Illidan's defeat. The Ogres have also had a lot to suffer over the years, and their population has been thinned by the wars against the Adventurers and the Shattrath, and first and foremost has been thinned by the Old Horde and by the famine which happened on Draenor. So their population should be low. I'm giving it personally a score of 3 out of 10. I'm not giving them a lower score because I believe they are still a significant power in Blade's Edge Mountains and in the various other areas they occupy throughout Outland. They are still there, the tribes still exist, just they are not very active now that Gru and presumably Hiking Mulgar are dead. Onto the quality of their troops, I'm giving them very high marks. I'm giving them 9 out of 10. An individual ogre is a force to be reckoned with. Joke all you want about how dumb ogres are and how adventurers kill them nonchalantly, but really an ogre is a gigantic 3 or 4 meter tall beast, which an individual orc would, on average, lose against an individual ogre, for instance. Ogres are nothing to be joked about. And their magic tends to be fairly crude, but still nonetheless fairly effective. As to their overall military strength, I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. Like I said, ogres are not something to deal with lightly. But on the other hand, they are kind of just content with occupying their place in Outland. They occupy Blade's Edge Mountains and their various other places. And they occasionally do expand and attack other people. But those are more random acts. They are, again, an important power in Outland, and they shouldn't be ignored. But they aren't central to Outland, I guess you could say. As to their unity aspect, it's a bit of a debatable topic. I'm personally giving them a 1 out of 10 because ogres tend to fight each other a lot, especially the tribes tend to fight each other a lot, and ogres are dumb. They don't really stick very much to a common ideal. Well, depends on a case-by-case basis. And now that Gruul is dead and most of the Gron are dead, the ogres would have split back into their various individual factions. Again, I'm pretty sure that Hiking Mulgar, the hiking of the ogres, does appear in the new arena in Blade's Edge, so he may still be alive. If he definitely is still alive, I'd give the ogres a higher score of, say, 3 or 4 out of 10. But again, I'm not sure how many ogres would respect the authority of this hiking, so I'm sticking with this safer score of 1 out of 10. Next up would be the Orcs of Orgrimmar. after Garrosh Hellscream was defeated. The Orcs, like I mentioned previously, the Orcs are known in Warcraft lore because they breed very rapidly. That's how Blizzard explained how they managed to recover so fast after the disastrous defeats of the Second War and so on, and the famine on Draenor and so on and so forth. So the Orcs should be very small population-wise, but nonetheless they do manage to recover very quickly. On that basis, I'm giving them a 5 out of 10. The Orcs have had a lot to suffer over the years, namely, again, the Second War and the events of Beyond the Dark Portal have thinned their population out extremely much, very much so. But their society on Durotar still managed to recover enough to the point where it became a threat to the world during Garrosh Hellscream's tenure as war chief. And their population should have been very affected by the siege of Orgrimmar and the uprising against Garrosh, but the Orcs do continue to make appearances. They have a lot of appearances during Warlords of Draenor as leading the charge against the Iron Horde. I'm giving, like I said, I'm giving them 5 out of 10 on this basis. It should be smaller, but apparently they are a power enough in their own right to be this high. As to their overall quality, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Orc warriors are tough, no question about that. Their technology is pretty crude, but much of their military technology is based on Goblin technology, so it's kind of hard to separate the two of them. But again, Orcs are tough. Their spellcasters tend to be a bit crude, but nonetheless fairly effective, especially their shaman. As to their overall military power and influence, they are a very influent and a very powerful faction. They are the backbone of the Horde, more or less. Maybe less so after the siege of Orgrimmar, but there was serious discussion among, say, the player community. How could the war chief be anything else than an orc? Orcs are the Horde, basically. And they continue to remain one of the main components of the Horde even after the siege of Orgrimmar. So I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Not to mention the fact that they are still a great power in Kalimdor, maybe even rivaling the Night Elves individually. So they are nothing to be trifled with, really. As to their overall unity, that's a bit of a weird topic. I'm giving them personally an 8 out of 10, namely because most of the bad apples within the Horde would have been removed due to the siege of Orgrimmar, and now only the more loyal members of the Horde would remain. Only those who follow Thrall and Vol'jin's ideals. Nonetheless, there would presumably still be little tensions and maybe cases of disunity, especially with the rogues and the warlocks, so I'm not giving them a higher score than 8 out of 10, but nonetheless they are a very united faction. Next up would be the Pandaren of Pandaria, mostly. Now the Pandaren are a bit of a weird topic because they don't really have an organized military. They have the Shadowpan and various factions, and they are not really a state. They are not really a country. They just sort of coexist as a society, but not a unified government, if that makes sense. So for that reason, I'm not going to give them a unity score, because it's a weird topic and Pandaren wouldn't really fight each other, but they are nonetheless united. It's complicated, so I'm not touching the unity aspect. Regarding their population, Pandaren have had 10,000 years to develop more or less peacefully, and for that reason I'm giving them a very high population score of 8 out of 10. Their population should have been affected by Mists of Pandaria fairly severely, let's not dismiss that. But their heartland of the Valley of the Four Winds and much of the Jade Forest hasn't really been affected. Sure, Kunlai Summit has been affected, but as a mountainous region, I imagine Kunlai Summit wasn't really that populated to begin with, and much of the population of Kunlai Summit then escaped to the Vale of Eternal Blossoms. So on that basis, I'm giving them 8 out of 10. Again, it should have been affected by the Pandaria campaign. If it hadn't been affected, I would have given them full marks, a full 10 out of 10. But yeah. As to the quality of their troops, again, they don't really have a military, so I'm going to only address the Shadow Pan, which are the only thing which kind of act like a military. The Shadow Pan are expert warriors, full marks 10 out of 10. A Shadow Pan is perhaps one of the deadliest warriors on Azeroth, hence how just 100 of them can manage to keep the entire Serpent Spite wall safe. And their prowess in combat was displayed throughout various instances in Mists of Pandaria and in the Vol'jin Shadows of the Horde novel, where they fought against the Zandalari. So yeah, Shadowpan are nothing to be dismissed. They are very strong quality-wise. Regarding their overall military and military influence on the world, I'm giving them a 2 out of 10. Like I said, they are strong enough to hold on to the wall and strong enough to presumably police the population of Pandaria. But like I said, they are not a world power. They are not a great power. They hold on to what's theirs and protect the innocent, and that's kind of about it. I suppose they did take an offensive role when it came to this very recent swarm of the Mantid, how they advanced into Townlong Steppes, and how they fought against in the campaign against the Thunder King. They also took an offensive role in that aspect on the Isle of Thunder. But again, they are... You wouldn't expect the Shadow Pant or any other inhabitant of Pandaria really to take a major role in a major fashion anywhere else on the world. Next up would be the Qiraji of Outland, and by extension the Silithid. Now the Qiraji and the Silithid have been fairly inactive after the Kafun and the Twin Emperors and so on and so forth were defeated. But I don't really think they are entirely dead. They still have to be there. There was an entire army, a gigantic army of bug people, so to say, behind the walls of Ankh-Raj before they were reopened. So I don't really think that the might of Kalimdor and the adventurers and the Bronze Dragonflight managed to kill them all. So for that reason, I'm giving them a tentative score of 5 out of 10. They have to still exist, they have to still be there, and I presume they would still be numerous. I don't think they disappeared out of thin air. As to the overall quality of their troops, I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. They rely almost entirely on swarm tactics, and swarmers are pretty much by definition, individual swarmers are pretty much by definition fairly weak. But on the other hand, I'm bumping them slightly higher than other swarm factions because their elite members are really, really strong. Namely, take a look, for instance, at General Rajax, or their Anubisaf, or their Obsidian Sentinels, and so on and so forth. Their elites, while few, are really, really strong. As to their overall military influence and power on the world, after Kafun and the Twin Emperors died, they pretty much lost all direction or most of their desire to conquer the world. So I don't really think they would just pretty much be almost like wild animals, not really like a directed swarm, say like the Scourge. So for that reason, I'm giving them a 3 out of 10. You shouldn't venture into Ankh-Raj alone. But then again, venturing into Ankh-Raj is kind of like venturing into a bear's cave. You might not really see Qiraji or Silithid much else outside of Ankh-Raj. Of course, they would still have the occasional hive, but nothing really very significant. As to their overall unity, after Kafun and the Twin Emperors died, I would give their unity a 1 out of 10. Like I said, they are pretty much wild animals. I presume they would have no sense of direction or purpose anymore. And without this unified hierarchy of Kafun, the Twin Emperors, their generals, and so on, they are just, like I said, wild animals. They are... like I said, just a bunch of bears, and bears fight each other, and so presumably would Qiraji and Silithid by that extension. So Yeah, I'm not going to repeat the wild animal analogy, you pretty much get the point. Next up would be the Saurok of Pandaria. Now the Saurok have recently, at the very least, well, ever since they have broken up from the Mogu Empire, they have never had a central government or a central leader, and or so on and so forth. They have always been just lonesome individuals, or maybe perhaps a few packs of bandits here and there. Well, throughout Mists of Pandaria, they have slowly, some packs have started to slowly grow and slowly unite, but they are not really a major threat, really. Regarding their population, I'm giving them a score of 2 out of 10. They are by no means the biggest population in Pandaria. They are just, like I said, roving packs of bandits and occasional rogue lone thieves. They are not significant population-wise at all. As to their overall quality, on the other hand, a Saurok is a deadly warrior. They are lizards bred for war, basically. They are strong. Their spellcasters are maybe a bit on the weak side, but they are strong, they are good assassins, so their quality is fairly high on an individual basis. Regarding their overall military influence and power in the world, it's a 2 out of 10. It's a fairly low score. They are robbers more so than warriors. There are individual packs of Saurok which roam here and there, which pose maybe a regional threat at best, but they are never going to, for instance, take over Pandaria, never by any means. And so, regarding their unity, I'm giving them a 1 out of 10. Saurok are organized in small bands which attack each other and sometimes fight within each other. Saurok don't like each other, don't like anyone around them. They are possibly the most disunited thing on this list. Next up would be Bolvar Scourge, which are still the dominant power in Northrend. Bolvar, well, not just Bolvar, the Scourge in general is extremely populous, extremely numerous, and especially if they were to go to war with someone, their numbers would replenish even more rapidly. I'm giving them a population score of 10 out of 10. The Scourge is basically just immense. It has been stated that they have the power to overwhelm the entirety of Azeroth if they wanted to, even without their leaders. So there's a lot of them, and they have the potential to recover their numbers extremely rapidly. The Scourge are, again, nothing to be trifled with. Hence why, if you do the Death Knight or the whole campaign, they do help the Lich King on the condition that he keep the Scourge in Northrend. They are an extremely powerful force. Regarding their overall quality, I'm giving them a fairly low score, 3 out of 10. The Scourge rely on swarm tactics, and an individual ghoul or an individual skeleton is a very weak force, and they do make up the majority of the Scourge's forces. They do have some very strong units, such as frost worms or giants, but again, they are fairly low quality. Regarding their overall military influence and power in the world, I'm giving them a very high score. I'm giving them a 9 out of 10. They dominate an entire continent. They dominate Northrend, and they have the power to overwhelm the entirety of Azeroth if they so desire. It's just that Bolvar keeps them in check for now, at the very least. I'm not if Arthas or Ner'zhul were the Lich King, I would give them a 10 out of 10. No question about that. Regarding their overall unity, full marks 10 out of 10. They are not really individuals who can make free choices. They are all under the control of the Lich King, at least in theory. And they are kept under his control. They do deserve full marks, a full 10 out of 10. No question about that. And like I said, they are the dominant power in Northrend. And again, they could take over the whole of Azeroth as if they wanted to. And one more thing, the only reason we won in Wrath of the Lich King was because we killed Arthas, not because we defeated the Scourge. The Scourge still has and had the potential to seriously recover and their population generally shouldn't have taken that much of a hit with our campaigns against them, even despite all of our efforts. They are still a significant force, hence why I'm giving them such high scores. Next up would be Shattrath City, or the Shattar. Now, Shattrath is split into multiple factions, and I'm not going to judge each individual faction independently, because that's a whole different can of worms. On a population level, Shattrath, I'm giving it a very high score. I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. Basically, Shattrath became the refugee gathering point for all of Outland. Shattrath is full of most of the survivors of Outland. It should be a very populous city, even if the overall quality of the population is just refugees, basically. As to their overall quality of their troops, it kind of varies. I'm giving them a very varied score from somewhere between 3 and 8 out of 10. Namely, the lower city does take a role in as a sort of militia, but the lower city is comprised mostly of refugees. They are not capable soldiers, hence the low score. But on the other hand, you have the elite Aldor and Scryers, which are very elite forces, which again account for this higher part of this scale. I'm not going to pick somewhere in the middle because the number of Aldor and the number of Scryers, I imagine, is kind of the same with the number of lower city people who actually form part of their militia, so it's a bit hard to tell. As to their overall military strength and influence, they are the peacekeepers of Outland. I'm giving them 7 out of 10. Even if they don't directly control the vast majority of the regions of Outland, they are the dominant power in Outland, especially now after Illidan's defeat and the Burning Legion is mostly, more or less, gone from Outland, presumably. So they are the dominant and the most influent faction in Outland, even if they don't necessarily directly control territories themselves. And they have provided assistance to the factions of Azeroth at times. For instance, they sent many troops under General Tirasalan to assist Faramore when Garrosh Hellscream bombed it. So they do have strength and influence, and they do sometimes push their weight around. As to their overall unity, it's kind of a similar situation with the Dwarves. I'm giving them a 6 out of 10 because the Aldor and Scryers are very much in conflict with each other. Even after they cooperated to stop Kil'jaeden at the Sunwell, they are presumably still in conflict with each other again. And the lower city is split into many gangs. There are a lot of illicit black market stuff going on there. But on the other hand, they are fairly united, hence why they are a 6 out of 10. They are fairly united behind the Naru and the Shattar. They would respect, everyone would respect Adol's orders, and nobody would rise against the Naru, for instance. Just that they, like I said, they are fairly divided within themselves, but they are all united behind the Naru, and most of them are united behind their goal of securing peace in Outland. Even though the lower city, like I said, is full of gangs and many infiltrators of other factions. For instance, the Shadow Council sometimes came to the lower city to hang out, basically. Next up would be the Kingdom of Stormwind. Now, Stormwind is a bit of a weird situation, because if this were a logical, working by the rules of history universe, Stormwind should be almost insignificant in regards to power level, I guess you could say, because it was a fairly prosperous kingdom before the First War, but the Horde utterly eradicated Stormwind in the First War, and Stormwind was rebuilt by the survivors of said First War. So the current population should be, again, the descendants of the First War, which should only be a few thousand people at most, and only 30 years have passed more or less since then, so they couldn't have recovered that fast. On the other hand, Stormwind is pretty much portrayed as the backbone of the Alliance, the most important member of the Alliance, despite the fact that, logically speaking, it should amount to almost nothing, really. So for that reason, I'm giving them a score of 8 out of 10, even though if it were a normal universe, I'd give them a 2 or 3 out of 10. Because they have the population and the military power to, again, be the backbone of the Alliance. The main component of all Alliance expeditions is composed of the forces of Stormwind for whatever reason. They are, again, portrayed as a very popular society. As to the overall quality of their military, I'm giving them a fairly high score of 7 out of 10. Stormwind soldiers are fairly tough. They would mostly be veterans of many wars. However, a lot of them are fairly fresh recruits somehow. Their technology level is also fairly high, again boosted mostly by the Dwarves and the Gnomes, but nonetheless it's kind of hard to separate them, so there they are. Stormwind, the Stormwind army's quality is fairly high, not to mention their navy. Moving on to their military influence and power over the world, it's very high, 9 out of 10 I'm giving them. They are one of the dominant powers of the world, and they are the dominant power in the Alliance, somehow. Their fleet is also possibly the largest in the world, again not counting the Naga, which are a special situation. And they are one of the main deciders of the world, and they throw their weight around a lot, especially considering the High King of the Alliance, the military commander of the Alliance, is the King of Stormwind, usually. And so yeah, Stormwind is a very influent and a very powerful nation, even though it logically shouldn't be, it nonetheless is in Warcraft lore. Regarding their unity, it's a bit of a weird topic. I'm giving them a score of between 6 and 8 out of 10. Stormwind was fairly united behind Varian, but nonetheless, Varian specifically had made a lot of divisions. First and foremost, there was the Defias, which I don't attribute to Varian alone. Don't say I do. But first and foremost, there's the Defias. Then Stormwind. Many people of Stormwind were complaining how Stormwind's economy was ruined by Varian's many wars, and a lot of people rebelled or fled from Stormwind as a result of that. For example, the Isles of the Draenei were filled with refugees from fleeing from Cataclysm, fleeing from Stormwind. So their unity would be a bit on the lower side of that spectrum, especially since Varian died, and every time someone new comes in power, the people tend to be a bit apprehensive, logically speaking. On the other hand, the people of Stormwind seem to be fairly committed to the Alliance, fairly committed to their kingdom, hence why there's also this bit higher side of the spectrum between 6 and 8, like I said. There are again many people who oppose, many humans who oppose Stormwind, namely, and there are many rogues, many people who leave Stormwind to do other things, to become pirates or become rogues or so on and so forth. So it is a whole interesting situation regarding the unity aspect. I'm mostly clinging to the higher side of that spectrum, but again, who knows? Especially with the succession of Anduin to the throne, that unity aspect might have taken a bit of a hit. Next up, I'm going to talk about the factions in mostly the Arathi Highlands, namely Stromgarde and the Syndicate. And Stromgarde split between the Forsaken Puppet State and the League of Erefor, I guess you could call it. Now, Stromgarde has been extremely depopulated due to wars and what happened after Trollbane's death and so on and so forth. I would also mention that Stromgarde is divided, politically speaking, between the League of Arafor, the humans backed by the Alliance, a puppet state of the Forsaken under Galen Trollbane, which occupied Stromgarde City specifically in Legion, until Galen Trollbane was killed by the Death Knights, and the Syndicate, which are the successors of the nation of Alterac, which are kind of the bandits of the continent of Lordaeron, I guess you could say. Regarding population, I'm giving all of these three factions a score of 1 out of 10. Stromgarde has been heavily depopulated, and this depopulation is again split into two factions, under the humans and under the Galen Trollbane's puppet state, which, again, they're all very depopulated. As to the Syndicate, they are the remnants of another ruined nation, and they tend to be a league of bandits mostly. It's not really, it's kind of hard to talk about a population specifically when it's debatable if you could consider them a nation or a country or a state, whatever. As to the overall quality of their military, I'm giving Galen Trollbane's puppet state, the Forsaken Stromgarde, 5 out of 10 regarding their military. They're pretty much the resurrected members of the humans of Stromgarde, which have been assigned under Galen Trollbane's control by Sylvanas. They're not going to be very effective warriors, especially since they're undead, and undead tend to not be very good warriors, and they don't really have many of the advantages of that the Forsaken have. They might be supported by Sylvanas, they might have the backing of the Forsaken, but the overall quality of the Stromgarde puppet, the Stromgarde Forsaken soldiers, is fairly low. As to the League of Arafor, I'm giving them a slightly higher score of 6 out of 10, mainly for the same reasons. They're just human soldiers. They don't have much of the backing of Stormwind, whether technologically or in quality, really. This also applies kind of to the Syndicate. The Syndicate are just a bunch of bandits. I'm also giving the Syndicate a score of 6 out of 10. They're just human bandits or human soldiers or human mages. They're kind of average, and they don't have the advantages that, say, Stormwind has, to again use that example. Regarding their overall military power and influence throughout the world, I'm giving the Forsaken Stromgarde and the League of Arafor Stromgarde both a score of 1 out of 10. They are entirely regional powers. They can't even hold on to their own territory really that well. Really, it could even be fairly lower. The Forsaken Stromgarde only hold on to the city of Stromgarde and maybe a few outposts here and there. The League of Arafor has Refuge Point and maybe a few spots in the Rafi Basin, and that's kind of about it. They do hold territory, but not much, and they're not an influent faction between the Horde or the Alliance, respectively. They're barely a faction within the Horde or the Alliance, respectively. They're more of hey, the Horde and Alliance are also battling here via the League of Arafor and the Forsaken. So yeah. As to the Syndicate, I'd give them an overall military power and influence a score of 2 out of 10. They are a threat in Lordaeron. They are not exactly a very significant threat. They can't take over the entirety of the continent, but they do disrupt things a lot in Lordaeron, and well, now less so now that the Forsaken have taken over much of their territory, but the Syndicate are still a force to be reckoned with in Lordaeron, and one of the powers in the Arathi Highlands now that we are talking about them. As to the overall unity aspect, that's kind of a weird situation. For the Forsaken Stromgarde, the Galen Trollbane's puppet state, I'm giving them a score of between 4 and 8 out of 10. It's kind of hard to tell. Now that Galen Trollbane has been killed, I imagine that unity would be even lower. They might just be completely absorbed into the overall Forsaken government, not remain an autonomous unit. And they are Forsaken Undead. They theoretically have free will. They have all sworn to serve Galen Trollbane and presumably by extension Sylvanas. But it's kind of questionable how united it would be. It's again kind of hard to tell, hence why I'm giving such a wide spectrum to the score of between 4 and 8 out of 10. As to the League of Arafor, the Stromgarde humans, I'm giving them a score of 8 out of 10. They seem to be really united behind their goal of retaking Stromgarde, and they seem to be fairly patriotic. But at this point, after so many years of failures and stagnation, really, I imagine many people would have just given up at this point, taken refuge in Stormwind or in Ironforge or whatever, and just given up the cause. But the humans who do remain in Refuge Point are presumably fairly united and fairly committed to their goal, even if really they could have just given up by now and nobody would blame them really. As to the Syndicate, their unity is kind of unknown. I'm giving it a very, very tentative and very speculative 3 out of 10, mostly because the rightful heirs of the throne of Alterac have been killed in Vanilla or before Vanilla. Isilden Perenlold was killed in Vanilla, the last remaining son of... Aluden Perenlold was killed in Vanilla, the last remaining son of Aiden Perenlold. So the Syndicate don't really have a strict leader anymore. They don't really have someone to direct them. So again, they seem to kind of stick together. I'm not entirely sure why or who would lead them. Presumably it's kind of a weird oligarchy at the moment, and presumably there would be some various power struggles between the former nobles of Alterac. But again, it's very hard to tell, and we don't really have that much information about the Syndicate. So I'm giving them, again, this very tentative score of 3 out of 10. Next up would be the Tauren. Now, the Tauren seem to be a fairly prosperous people, and of course they have had their fair share of conflicts, but for the most part they haven't really been that affected by the Alliance versus Horde conflict or by the rebellion against Garrosh Hellscream, really. Of course there was the Magatha Grim Totem incident, but that was more of an isolated case. As a result, because their population has had time to develop and they seem to be in the lore a fairly prosperous race, I'm giving their population a score of 6 out of 10. I'm not giving it a higher score because until Thrall showed up in Kalimdor, the Tauren were on the verge of being made extinct by the Centaur. They were hunted down by the Centaur. And while they have managed to recover and they have managed to completely stop the threat of the Centaur, for the most part at the very least. As for the overall quality of their troops, I'd give them an 8 out of 10. A Tauren is a big, furry creature. It's not something to take on lightly. They're very tough and they're very strong warriors. And they're very good hunters as well. Their spellcasters, they're not very notable spellcasters, but they don't really lack that much in that department as well, either. As for their overall military power and influence in the world, I'm giving them a 6 out of 10. They are fairly notable, very influential in Kalimdor, and they are a strong power, I guess you could say. They have a strong military. They are influent within the Horde. Many of the Horde's expeditions have had many Tauren soldiers. So they have had power, and they have had the power to throw that power around, so to say. As for their overall unity, I'm going to give them a very high score of 9 out of 10, namely because many of the bad apples, so to say, were purged when Magatha Grim Totem rebelled. When her rebellion failed, many of the Tauren who thought about rebelling against Cairn Bloodhoof didn't do that. And the Tauren are split into various tribes, but these tribes don't, unlike some other societies, such as they don't really tend to fight each other as much. And they tend to be very united around their chieftain Cairn, now Bane Bloodhoof. And they don't seem to cause many internal problems, and they seem to be very united by supporting the Horde and behind their united chieftain, their high chieftain, with the sole exception of the Grim Totem. But then again, the Grim Totem have been, for the most part, purged from the overall politics of Thunderbluff, I guess you could say. As to the Grim Totem Tauren, their population has been very severely hurt by the various wars which have been going on, and by their failed rebellion against Cairn and Bane Bloodhoof. And not to mention the fact that about half, or not half, I think it was described as about a third of their tribe abandoned the Grim Totems and joined the unified Tauren government under Bane Bloodhoof. So for their population, I'm going to give them a score of 1 out of 10. First and foremost, it's just a single tribe of Tauren, comparable to most of the other tribes as far as we know, and that tribe has been severely hurt due to, like I said, the various wars and the various betrayals and so on and so forth. As to the overall quality of their military, I'm giving them the same score as the Tauren for pretty much the same reasons, not really much I can add there. For their military influence and power in the world, I'm going to give them a score of 2 out of 10. They are notable in Kalimdor, and specifically in the regions where they inhabit, namely namely Dustswallow Swamp, Marsh, and the Stone Talon Mountains, and they have been able to help sway conflicts in one way or another by shifting allegiances from one side to another. But they're not really notable. They're not a great power in Kalimdor. They mostly stick to the shadows. Hence how I'm justifying this fairly low score. As for their overall unity, I'm giving them a score of 10 out of 10 full marks. They are somehow all united behind Naga for Grim Totem. And again, most of the bad apples, I guess you could say, most of those who were questioning Magafa rejoined Bane's unified Tauren government. So these Grim Totem would be the most loyal of Magafa's servants, and the most those who would be most willing to do her bidding, basically. And unlike some other evil factions, the Grim Totem don't really seem to infight that much. They don't really seem to have a lot of infighting, unlike say the Naga or the Fel Orcs. The Grim Totem just don't fight each other as much. Sure, they might assassinate each other here and there, but they don't fight, again. They're all loyal to Naga for Grim Totem, so they are, in conclusion, a very small, not very notable force, but a very compact and a fairly strong one when provoked. Next up would be the Tovir of Oldham. Now, the Tovir have had a lot to suffer due to the recent civil war between the Ramkahen and the Orcs versus the Neferset, and of course Deathwing's involvement, the Air Elementals, and so on and so forth. So despite the fact that they have had millennia to prosper and develop peacefully, I'm giving their population a score of 3 out of 10 because 2 of the 3 tribes have been utterly eradicated, and the 3rd tribe has still been pretty severely affected by the war. As to the overall quality of their troops, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Tovir are tough, basically. They're very tough people. Their weapons may tend to be a little bit on the archaic side, but they're nonetheless fairly effective. And, of course, if something were to go wrong, they could just activate a Halls of Origination. But that's a whole different subject that we're not going to broach. So, quality level, they're fairly high, although not as high as some other ones on the list. Regarding their overall military strength and influence in the world, I'm giving them a 2 out of 10. They are entirely a regional power. They control Oldham, yes, but they don't ever venture outside of Oldham. They are not a player in international politics. They just stick to their little corner of the world, and that's kind of about it. Not to mention again the fact that they have been severely affected by the recent civil war, and again, despite the fact that I gave them a 3 out of 10 regarding their population, not all of the Tol'vir are soldiers, not all of them are part of the military, hence how I'm justifying this 2 out of 10 score. On the other hand, regarding their unity, I'm giving them a very high score, a 9 out of 10. Most of the Tol'vir seem to be pretty united behind their safekeeping of the Titan artifacts and relics and their loyalty to King Faoris of the Ramkahen. Not to mention the fact that now the other 2 tribes have been mostly eradicated. The Ramkahen are pretty much the sole remaining tribe behind the Tol'vir, and they have been further unified by this war against the Neferset and against Deathwing. So I don't really see them being very disunited. Maybe I could have even given them a 10 out of 10, although I think that's pushing it just a little bit. Next up would be the Vrykul of Northrend, mostly. Now, the Vrykul are not really much of a player now that the Lich King has been defeated and that King Imran has been defeated. I'm giving their population an extremely tentative score of 4 out of 10, and there's a few issues with that. Namely, the Vrykul have been stated to have basically disappeared entirely from the world until Wrath of the Lich King, where they suddenly, out of nowhere, suddenly reappeared and made their impact on the Howling Fjord, the Grizzly Hills, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of, like I said, they had a fairly prosperous civilization, presumably, beforehand. Then they suddenly went to sleep for some reason, and then they woke up during and before the events of Wrath of the Lich King, for some reason again, presumably because of the Lich King. So it's kind of hard to evaluate their population, not to mention that it's obviously been affected by the Alliance and Horde conflicts, and by the Scourge and so on and so forth. So I'm giving them a very tentative 4 out of 10, as a sort of educated, very speculative guess. I wouldn't be surprised if someone else would come up with a different number, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with them. As to the overall quality of their troops, their soldiers, they're pretty high quality. I'm giving them 8 out of 10. Vrykul are extremely deadly warriors, no question about that. Their magic also tends to be fairly powerful. Their runic magic is especially deadly. And also the Vrykul tend to use proto-dragons a lot in combat, so that also helps their case when talking about quality. Regarding their overall military strength and influence over the world, I imagine that now, after the Lich King and Imran have been defeated, the Vrykul have sort of split back up into their various little tribes throughout Northrend. So I don't really think they would be that influential or powerful in the world. They would be a fairly regional power, controlling Utgard Keep and several other points throughout Howling Fjord and Grizzly Hills, but not really much else in my honest opinion. And also, speaking of which, regarding their unity, I'm giving them a score of 2 out of 10. King Imran and the Lich King are dead. There's almost nothing to unite the Vrykul now, except maybe they feel threatened by the Alliance and Horde, so they might still continue to band together, who knows. But also the Vrykul tend to also fight each other a lot, and the tribes also, again, fight each other a lot, so they're not very united by any means, hence why I'm giving them a 2 out of 10. Next up would be the Worgen, the nation of Gilneas. Now, the Worgen have been pretty severely affected by the Worgen curse and by the Forsaken invasion. Not so much, they haven't been affected that much by the Scourge invasion, although they have also suffered losses then. But, like I said, the biggest effects have been the curse and the Forsaken invasion again. So they are, despite the fact that they were a fairly prosperous kingdom before the Second War, their population and overall economic and military strength has overall declined throughout the events of World of Warcraft, of just Warcraft in general, really. So for that reason, I'm giving their population score a 3 out of 10. Despite the fact that the vast majority of the Worgen are now under the banner of Gilneas, loyal to Gen Greymane and so on and so forth, their nation still has suffered very heavy losses throughout these events, not to mention the fact that they have had to flee their entire nation. They have had to board refugee ships and run away. So their population is not something to brag about, so I think a 3 out of 10 score is fairly appropriate. As to their overall quality, on the other hand, I'm giving them a very high score, a 9 out of 10. Worgen are extremely tough. They have been known to turn the tide of entire battles. They are experienced soldiers for the most part. They are just extremely tough people. They're nothing to laugh about, so to say, to bark about. Har har. As to their overall strength and influence, I'm giving them a 3 out of 10. They have definitely helped the Alliance, they have definitely provided a fairly significant boost to the Alliance, but they are not, there's just not enough of them to constitute a significant force, really. So yeah, they are tough, but they are not like the Blood Oaths, really. They are just not enough to matter that much. As to their unity, on the other hand, I'm giving them full marks, 10 out of 10. All of the Worgen seem to be united behind retaking Gilneas and behind King Gen Greymane. Despite the fact that there were divisions in Gilnean society before the Forsaken invaded, all these factions have united and they don't backstab each other, they don't conspire against each other, and they're all loyal to Greymane and fighting for Gilneas. So they have an admirable level of unity, especially since most other factions which have this high of a unity seem to be evil factions, unlike the Worgen, which aren't. Next up would be the Yongle of Pandaria. Now the Yongle have also been pretty completely smashed by adventurers, by the Shadowpan, not to mention by the premature swarming of the Mantid. So their population has taken a pretty big hit, hence why I'm giving them a score of 2 out of 10. At the moment, the Yongle only really seem to inhabit certain zones within the town-long steppes, and presumably much of their invasion of Kunai Summit was defeated and eradicated, hence their very low population numbers. As to their overall quality, on the other hand, it's very high. I'm giving them a 9 out of 10. Yongle are extremely deadly warriors, and their tactics are also extremely deadly and efficient ones, especially considering that they had a fairly low population regardless of the events of Mists of Pandaria. Their population was fairly low, and they adapted their warfare to this. And like I said, their tactics and their military style is a very effective and a very strong one. As to their overall military power and influence, like I said, they have been pretty completely smashed by adventurers, the Shadowpan and the Mantid. I'm giving them a 3 out of 10. They are strong enough to seriously threaten, I suppose, town-long steps. It's kind of hard to find a verb for that. They probably don't really have the strength to cross over the wall anymore, but they are nonetheless a pretty serious threat, a pretty serious power within their little corner of the world. Regarding their unity, it's a bit of an interesting subject. The Yongle are extremely disunited, and they are extremely prone to fighting each other. So I'm giving them a score of 2 out of 10, but that doesn't mean that this particular score of 2 out of 10 actually affects their warfare, because the Yongle have in place several special rules to sort of channel this infighting towards certain things, for instance ritual combat, and even then the Yongle infighting has no victims really. The Yongle, when they fight each other, they fight with blunted weapons. They try to minimize casualties at all possible because they realize that they are a culture which is always on the verge of extinction. So despite the fact that they are extremely disunited, this lack of unity doesn't really affect them that much really regarding their relations with their neighbors, which makes them a fairly interesting topic. They're basically, as a sort of summary of the Yongo, you could basically describe them in 2 words, fire Mongols. Finally, we would have my personal favorite faction, namely the Zandalari and their subservient tribes. Now, the Zandalari have been defeated numerous times throughout the events of Cataclysm and Mists of Pandaria, so their numbers should be fairly low. Their native island of Zandalar is also sinking, but on the other hand, I find it a bit hard to believe that they truly committed their entire population to the campaigns that they lost, namely the Thunder King. Hence why I'm giving the Zandalari and their collective tribes, namely all of them altogether, a population score of 5 out of 10. I would honestly expect to see more of them. I'm honestly kind of not sure why they aren't in Legion. I guess they do make a few side appearances as slaves of the Sea Giants, but that's a different topic. As to the overall quality of their military, it varies. I'd give them a score of between 9 and 5 out of 10. Namely, the Zandalari soldiers, the Zandalari tribe, are extremely high quality. I'd give them 9 out of 10. The Zandalari are extremely deadly warriors, some of the deadliest spellcasters on Azeroth. But on the other hand, you have the lesser tribes, which are they are not as refined, and many of them serve as peons for the Zandalari. Hence why I'm justifying this score of 5 out of 10 for them. As to their overall military power and influence throughout the world, I'm giving them a 4 out of 10. They have the potential to be a threat should they decide to invade pretty much any region of the world. If they decided to invade Durotar, they would be a threat, and they could potentially have the potential to take it if the Horde doesn't react fast enough, just as a hypothetical example. So their overall strength is, I'm giving it as a 4 out of 10. They are significant, but they are not as significant as some of the great powers of Azeroth, not to mention the fact that they have been utterly smashed repeatedly, and who knows, it might actually be that all of these, the population and the overall military strength of the Zandalari is actually lower than how I'm presenting it, because they might have been smashed harder than I personally believe they have. Who knows? Regarding their overall unity, I'm giving them a 7 out of 10. Zandalari seem to be fairly united with each other. The coalition of tribes they have gathered are often bickering with each other, and they are often more or less fighting with each other. But the Zandalari do a fairly effective job of keeping them in check and keeping them loyal to the cause of reforming a troll empire. On the other hand, I can imagine that their unity has gone down somewhat after their various defeats, especially after the Thunder King was defeated, because empires like this tend to maintain themselves through victories, and the legitimacy of the Zandalari was, oh hey, we're the smartest and strongest of the trolls, let's prove our strength, and they got smashed repeatedly. So their legitimacy and their overall influence might have gone down, but again, it's a bit of a difficult subject to broach because we don't really know precisely. So these are most of the factions of Azeroth and how I would personally evaluate them based on the above mentioned criteria. I'm also going to display a little top list for each of these criteria, namely which 5 factions have the largest populations, in my opinion, the highest quality of troops, the highest military power and influence, and which are the most united. And I suppose this brings us to the end of this particular really in-depth analysis of the world of Azeroth. You're of course free to disagree or free to ask for details or how I came up with these numbers or so on and so forth. And I would honestly like to hear your thoughts on if you think I qualified these factions correctly, if I gave them correct scores. or if you think they deserve the higher or lower score, and so on and so forth. I would like to hear your thoughts, is the conclusion. And I shall see you all next time, and I wish you all farewell.